Hey there, Professor Kelly Watson here today talking about co-authoring relationships. So this can be an area that's fraught with, a lot of opportunities, but a lot of potential pitfalls as well. So why would you want to work with a colleague, for example, on an article, particularly for practitioners? Well, obviously, if you have colleagues who have published in these spaces before, then you can tap their experience. And that is something that is really important because people who have experience in these channels may have the connections needed to be invited to publish in these spaces, and they may have experience with the entire process from beginning to end, which could save you a lot of time and get you access that maybe on your own would take you a lot more time to gain. They also may know things about the writing convention, what the stylistically, how you should be tailoring the article, how you should format and balance the research that you are trying to convey, how much of the theory needs to be involved, or how much this particular publication is concerned about how studies were designed and things like that. So coming from a more experienced author, you can get some of that strategy and certainly save time learning how to do the process, right? You're going to get exposure, you're going to get even the back and forth process. If you are accepted or are required to do a revision, then having an experienced author can certainly make that process less uh, difficult or ambiguous because they've experienced it before. So I think overall it can actually speed up your path to publication and save you a lot of heartache and a lot of wasted time. Um, that said, you want to make sure you find somebody that has those skills. If several new people are trying to publish, then you're not going to be able to benefit from that experience. So it would be good to try to find somebody who's done it before, and that way you're getting something out of this collaboration. Another reason that you might want to co-author is to share the workload. Divide up the research, the writing, and the editing tasks and make it more manageable because let's face it, you're working in your professional roles and you may even be teaching on the side. So sharing the workload is going to help save you time as well. The other thing is that different co-authors may contribute different knowledge. They may have, expertise in a particular methodology. Some others may be better at doing literature review, and others may be better at writing and editing. So bringing together a diverse team of people can not only share that workload, but can bring in skills and experience that maybe is not your strength for as much. It helps you build a network into other colleagues and whether they be academics or practitioners, and that can support future research. So bringing somebody in to test them out to see if you can, have a good working relationship on a paper can certainly, build your network of people that you could collaborate with in the future. And also, if you have multiple authors that all have these different fields or different areas of expertise, that can actually give you and your article greater credibility because of how you're able to tap those different levels of expertise. Especially if somebody's published before, has experience, then they're going to already have a name and credibility, and that's going to lend some more credibility to your name if you've never done anything like that. So those are some of the benefits to doing it. Obviously, there are also drawbacks. And the first one that I think comes to everybody's mind is a fear of an uneven contribution. And it can certainly happen where everybody's on a paper and one person's doing all the work, and that can cause tension. And it can also become very frustrating that somebody's going to get credit for this pub and get their name on it, but they haven't actually contributed. Now, I always caution people that equal contribution does not always equal the same amount of time or the same amount of writing or things like that. Because again, if somebody has reputational capital and can get you into the pub to begin with, then that can be worth a lot of writing and editing. And so you don't want to try to make it so even of a writing contribution that you lose sight of some other things that people bring. So, for example, I'm working on a paper with some colleagues right now, and I'm taking on the bulk of the, grunt work, of formatting it, submitting the IRB, um, pulling together the meetings to talk to my colleagues about what's happening, and I'll probably end up shouldering the bulk of the writing. But, several of the colleagues that are on this paper have published in this space and have a lot of experience in knowing what works, and just their thought partnership has been, extraordinary. And also, several of the colleagues come from just different disciplines. And so having that interdisciplinary, this paper is going to be interdisciplinary. And so having that expertise in the room is very valuable for the paper, because they all bring in a different research stream and bring that together. So even if I still have to catch up and go read into that research stream, it's worthwhile because they're telling me where to look and telling me where to go. So I think that yes, uneven contribution can be a drawback of co-authoring, but I think you have to really frame for yourself, what does that mean? Because contribution can look very different. It doesn't all have to be, an equal amount of writing. In fact, you may not want an equal amount of writing, because think about how you're going to have to integrate that and make it sound like a single voice. You're never going to get away with submitting an article that has, multiple voices, because that's just confusing to the reader and isn't going to deliver for you a great product. So, second drawback of co-authoring is maybe loss of autonomy. So maybe your voice doesn't end up shining in the way that you would have hoped, because you had to make so many compromises on whether it's writing style or the topic itself, or what kind of methodology used to do the actual study. So that can actually, kind of limit your own control or your own, as I say, voice showing up on it. And so that can be perplexing to some people, because they really want to write and they want their voice to shine. So it is something to think about when you're co-authoring, and you want to make sure that that you speak up, and that your colleagues are aware of what contribution you want to make and what part of the article, or what voice you want to have show up in the article. So really, something to think about. Again, if losing that autonomy leads to a better product, then you should be willing to do that, because it should be about the work overall at the end of the day. But it's something to kind of be very mindful of, and ask yourself up front, how would I feel if my voice wasn't shining through in the way that I'd hoped for this idea or this topic that I'm writing about? The third drawback is coordination challenges. Obviously, the more authors you have on an article, the more time it's going to take just in pure coordination, making sure that everybody's everybody's weighing in on the project plan in the right order, and that their contribution doesn't get held up. One of the reasons that it takes so long to publish anything is because of this multiple author, problem, where you may have time to work on something in a particular time frame, but if you need something from someone else and they don't get it to you, then your time frame may pass, and now you're really busy with something else. And so it's a real art to weave through these openings and to understand when your co-authors and your collaborators have their open spaces, so that you can design a timeline that fits everybody. I can't tell you how many times I've thought, oh, we'll have this knocked out by Christmas, or we'll have this knocked out, in 6 months. And then it just takes longer, because people's priorities, co-authors' priorities, and open time bubbles tend to be limited and you may not align with it. Something may take you longer than you think, and then you're not in their bubble when they have that bubble available. Um, so just so that you're thinking about when are usually good times. If you are co-authoring with somebody who's in academia, summertime is often big writing time, writing space for academics. So you're going to see a lot of movement then. Um, Over Christmas is another time because people tend to get a break then, and some schools have 2 or 3 weeks over the holidays. And so that's when people knock out a lot of writing. And then spring break is another time when, usually people get some deep dive, quiet time to be able to write. When academics are teaching during the school year, it's very distracting and hard to go deep. And so there may be 2 or 3 months during a semester where they just don't have an opportunity to move something forward. So as you're thinking about that, it's also true of reviewers. So reviewers tend to turn articles around relatively quickly in the summertime. And so you may submit and then get a response pretty quickly. But if you submit something the first week of September, it could be 3 or 4 months before you hear, depending on the journal, um, any response or any feedback. So just something to think about. It's probably going to take you a lot more time than you expect to be able to go back and forth on an article. And the more co-authors you have, the more that's going to add to that because of people's schedules. So coordination can definitely be a challenge. Um, Authorship disputes. So this is when people have disagreements about, anything from how the paper is going to be structured, what methodology you're using, all the way to whose name is going to come first. And if you're publishing in academia, the first name generally, and this is a very big generalization because it's not true of all fields. Some fields like accounting, I believe it has nothing to do. The order is literally alphabetical. But for a lot of fields like management, the first author's name is the one who's kind of like the main author for the article, and they get that credit of the first author position. So, and sometimes there are disputes as to who that's going to be. Generally, it's the most senior researcher on the team or the person who maybe initiated the idea and created the team and brought everyone together to do this collaboration. But it's important, especially if you feel everyone's had an equal contribution to the team, that you sort of work out who's going to be the author before the main author, before you start working together, before you collaborate, because otherwise there will be some infighting, and that can actually cause your article to not even get completed. So it's just some things to think about. It's also good, just like in all management, to have thought through a mechanism for how to resolve disputes up front. So here's how we're going to make decisions like this. Here's the model we're going to use if we get into some kind of conflict, so that we can always go back to that pre-agreed process for how to resolve disputes, rather than just sort of flailing around, which you could run the risk that your article never gets done. Obviously, the further along in the process you are, the more time you've invested, that could potentially become a big problem, something that uh, really could be painful and even limiting career-wise down the road, depending on the influence some of your co-authors may have. So something else to think about, particularly if you're a practitioner and you're co-authoring with an academic, is that the practitioner voice may get really subdued or diluted in a situation where, academics tend to prioritize theory over application. And so you do want to make sure, again, up front, that the practitioner voice comes through. That's why you're doing a DBA. That's why you're contributing to this literature, and that voice is a really important voice. Because while theory is important and theory is the foundation, you have to have this generalizability in practice. Otherwise, this information is not useful. So make sure that your voice does not get minimized in this process. And again, you may want to have upfront conversations about how much the practitioner focused voice is going to be prevalent in the article, or at least what do you think should be the right amount of practitioner focus in the article before you get started. And then, of course, obviously, if you're writing for a practitioner audience, then that's going to be a lot bigger, in which case you'll want to work with any academic co-authors to make sure that the theoretical voice, how much of the theoretical voice is going to be part of this, is something that's thought through. And then finally, some of the risks with or drawbacks with co-authors is the fear or the concern about ethical risks. So, if you're dividing up the research and you have one of your co-authors go off and do, some of the methods, some of the data analytics piece, you want to make sure that they're not going to cut corners on you and do something unethical that doesn't meet the scholarly standards, because your reputation is at risk as much as theirs is for that kind of an ethical violation. So, I'll give you an example. A lot of times in a co-authoring situation, the main author will have sort of the role of structuring things and creating the project plan and thinking of the overall uh, tone or research question or where we're going to go with this research. And then they may farm out to somebody else, especially somebody who's, got a reputation as being a really good methodologist, that they may farm out some of the data piece. That person could get a bunch of data that doesn't work or doesn't meet, doesn't really answer the research question in a robust way. And then you may find them cutting variables or cutting cases. You do have some discretion as to how you clean up data. And so there may be corners cut in that situation. It really helps if you also are savvy with these methods so that you can be a second pair of eyes and check over anything that's done. Take the data set, see if you can replicate what your colleague has done. Take different points and just do little tests. Does this hang true? Is this happening? Also, really good idea to make sure everybody keeps a copy of everything. So literally, if you cut cases, what cases got cut? Where are they? What would happen if you put those cases back in? And that sort of thing. So just something to think about, that, when you do it all yourself, you have complete control over the ethical or the quality that happens. But if you are co-authoring, then you have to make sure that you have a way to test it. Don't just say, well, I'm not good at statistics, so I'm going to let somebody else do it, because that could ultimately undermine your reputation down the road. So overall, most experienced publishers or academics who publish would say that having a written agreement up front is a really good idea whenever you're in a collaborative relationship with other co-authors. Bring them together, make it very clear who's going to be first author, what are our roles going to be, how are we going to resolve disputes, should we have a dispute, and what is going to be our mechanism for testing quality, making sure that the data integrity is held at its highest standard, and that we not only have success, but we have a great, future together as potential co-authors down the road. Because let's face it, once you've invested this much in a co-authoring relationship, and if you do get something published, you have this opportunity now to expand on that research, to go down other research angles with this foundational paper. And so you want to learned enough in this process and built such a great relationship that you guys can knock out the next one and the next one and the next one. And you'll often see in the literature that people keep publishing together. Why? Well, because they have this trust and this great, really efficient engine built up now for being able to collaborate and get articles out. So I hope this has been helpful. Best of luck with your co-authoring relationships.